Cerne Abbas giant is Britain's largest and the best known hill chalk figure in the world. He goes by many names, including the Rude Man, Rude Giant, Old Man, or simply the Giant. According to Victoria magazines, local people also refer to him as Hellis and Helly, although the giant himself doesn't mind just being called Sir. Cerne Abbas is the name of the local village that the giant overlooks. He lies upon Trendle Hill, and atop this hill is another landmark, an Iron Age earthwork known as the Trendle or the Frying Pan. There are other hill chalk figures around the UK, such as the Lungman of Willington and the Uffington White Horse. The Cerne Abbas giant is a scheduled monument of England, and the site is now owned by the National Trust. He is an important part of local culture, fertility folklore, and British heritage. The giant lies upon a hexagonal base. He's been cut into the ground of around 2 inches wide in depth into the chalk below. He stands around 180 feet high and 167 feet wide, or 144 feet without the club. This is around the size of a 20-storey apartment building in the UK. His club alone is 120 feet in length, and his other club is around 36 feet long. This is known as Britain's most famous phallus. It's also one of the most famous penises in the world. When the giant is scaled down to human size, his erection is 10 inches long. Scans in 2020 suggest that the original giant may have been clothed. Therefore, the penis could have been added later as a dick joke, proving that these jokes never get old and our ancestors are just as immature as we are in modern times. The line across his waist has also been suggested to be a belt. His penis could have also been smaller in the past. This is because, over time, the circle representing his belly button could have merged with the penis, as seen by these early sketches of the giant. Gentleman's Magazine in 1764 described the figure as having a navel. However, his penis has since grew to cover this up. The giant doesn't seem too bothered about this. Before this growth, the penis would have measured 6 inches when adjusted for human height. This is average length. In 1993, the National Trust gave the giant a nose job. This is because the nose had over the years worn away. The nose itself does not have an outline, instead it's just a grassy bump in the centre of the giant's face. However, earlier sketches of the giant seem to depict the giant having a sketched out nose. However, it's unknown how accurate these sketches are. The giant also could have had a cloak over his left arm, and this may have depicted an animal skin. He may have also held a severed head in his left hand. However, these have since worn away. The giant's origins are unknown, and its historic accounts have perplexed archaeologists and historians throughout the generations. It is supposed to be 1,000 years standing, as there is a 3-figure date between its legs. Some think it was cut by the ancient Britons and that they worshipped it. This is a note from the earliest known survey of the giant. It was sent anonymously to the Royal Magazine in 1763. However, written history cannot prove this date. However, this folklore still surrounds the giant to this date, and many believe it. There may be a reference to the giant in medieval times. You see, there's an account of the hill before it was named Trendle Hill. In medieval times, this hill was seemingly referred to as the hill in which the giant is located, although they never mention the giant itself, so they could have been referring to something else. The hill was named Trendle Hill in the 1600s, and there was probably an abbey at the top of this hill. In Tudor times, they talk of the hill and of the maypole dancing that happened at the top of it. However, there is no mention of a giant, but some suggest that it may have just been overgrown in Tudor times. Proper surveys of the hill were done in 1540 and 1617. These surveys were conducted by the respected John Norden. However, there is no mention of the giant when depicting Trendle Hill. This is strange, as John Norden's surveys are normally very detailed. This is stranger still, as there's evidence of the Uffington White Horse as far back as the 11th century. It's highly unlikely that John Norden would have ignored the giant's existence. The earliest written record of the giant dates to 1694, when St Mary's Church was charged 3 shillings for, and I quote, repairing ye giant. The first observations of the giant were recorded by the Bishop of Bristol, Francis Wise, and William Stukeley in the early 18th century, proving that at this time the giant was on full display. It's highly strange that if the giant is indeed ancient, other observations do not exist. This lends evidence to the giant being a newer creation than we had originally thought. By 1763, the giant was a mainstream sight. It's described in magazines across the whole of the British Isles. Over time, the giant became neglected and overgrown, until its owner, Horace Pitt Rivers, the 6th Baron of the Rivers, ordered the giant repaired in 1868. In his instructions he noted, and I quote, "as near possible to its original condition." This being said, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Stonehenge, for example, was first recorded in 1130, but no one credible would suggest that it isn't older. The discrepancies in the historical accounts is what adds to the giant's fame and uniqueness, and some hope that the giant's origins are never found out. We'll now be exploring the possible origin theories of the giant, starting with the ancient theories. Rodney Castleton, an historian in 1996, carried out his own investigations. He was convinced that the giant did indeed carry a cloak, which had been suggested by previous historians. He also found a mound beneath the giant's left arm, which could have been a sculpted severed head, a common ancient Celtic religious symbol. Some suggest the giant could be a depiction of the Celtic god Nodens, and that the giant itself is a great symbol of ancient spirituality. This is believed as the giant shares similarity with a carving of Nodens on a skillet handle dating around 10 to 51 AD. Therefore, the giant could have been created by the Durotriges tribe to represent the god of fertility and hunting. This is not the skillet people are referring to, but it is the closest skillet I could find. I spent about a month trying to find this supposed skillet, but couldn't find it, so I reached out for help. The primary source for this skillet seems to come from Heritage Gateway. I've contacted them, and they say that they got this information from the National Trust. So I contacted the National Trust, and they got me through to Martin Papworth, who is a highly respected archaeologist and knows a lot about the Cerne Abbas giant. He stated that he'd heard of this skillet before, and looked it up in the British Museum publications for Hodge Hill. Hodge Hill is probably where this skillet originated from. He also couldn't find this supposed skillet handle. There are many skillets with faces and figures on them, but it's really difficult to attribute them to the god of Nodens, so this theory seems to be a case of Chinese whispers to me. I also contacted the British Museum but had no reply. Above the giant is an earthwork that's also a scheduled monument. Some suggest this could have been an early Briton or Roman settlement. This site is believed by many locals to have been used for maypole dancing. However, it's disputed by other locals who place the maypole elsewhere, but it could have just been moved over time. It's possible, however, that these earthworks could in fact be a tomb, and the giant is a depiction of the person who lays rest in the tomb. Some suggest that the giant could be Orion because of his stance. However, this is an extremely common stance to draw a human in, so it's unlikely. This theory is the least common amongst the ancient theories, but is really popular amongst those who enjoy horoscopes and stargazing. It has, however, grown in popularity since Peter Wright wrote the book The Cerne Abbas Giant, Landscape, Gods and the Stargate in 2013. Orion is tied to creation, and therefore the penis could be tied into that. We'll now be exploring the Roman theories of the giant. Early antiquarians associated it with a Saxon deity or a Romano-British figure of Hercules, although no one has definitive proof why, but it's most likely that they just asked local residents. Richard Pocock in 1754 stated that the giant's name was either the Giant or Heli. Richard Gough in 1789 also suggested that the giant was a minor Saxon deity, named by the Camden as Hegel. William Stuckley in 1760, on the other hand, suggested that the local name for the giant was Helis or Heli, and this itself may have been a bastardised local name for Hercules, the Roman god. If this theory is true, then the giant could be dated to Roman times or just shortly after. This theory does make sense, as Hercules is often depicted naked, with a knotted club in one hand and the Nemean lion pelt in his left hand, therefore explaining the eroded cloak that is now missing. This theory took off in the 1930s with help from the archaeologist Stuart Pigott, although he did also suggest that the figure could have been a Romanised version of a Briton god, with the former Briton god being Romanised into Hercules. The Romans used to integrate other gods all the time, as to help Romanisation and increase stability. Others, building upon this theory, suggest that the Cerne Abbas giant could have been carved under the reign of Emperor Commodus. This is because Commodus was trying to revitalise the cult of Hercules across the empire, and also believed that he was a reincarnation of Hercules, or may have just wanted other people to believe that. This is a bust of Commodus. Stuart Pigott, in later research, also linked the name Hellis with an obscure pagan figure, Helith. According to Walter of Coventry, a 13th century chronicler, Helith was once worshipped in the Cerne area. This theory is also currently growing much in popularity due to the findings in 2021 linking the giant to the Anglo-Saxons. And we'll be getting to that in just a minute. Patricia Vale, a 97-year-old resident in 2021, was interviewed. She suggested that the giant could have been a Roman infantry regimental insignia and was created to keep the troops busy. Hercules wielding a club and erection was not an uncommon symbol in Rome. For instance, look at this coin. I couldn't find any evidence to back this theory up, but it does have a ring of common sense to it. The archaeologist Alice Sheridan suggests that the giant could have been built to challenge a new Christian religion by a still pagan people. Although this is only speculation from what I can tell, as she's published no evidence to back this up. I've also come across similar theories that suggest that medieval monks could have done this for similar reasons. We'll now be exploring the Anglo-Saxon and medieval theories of the giant. Local legend is that the giant used to steal sheep in the Blackmore Vale. One day, the people found the giant sleeping on the hill and killed him. They then proceeded to draw a line around the giant, which is what we see now. Another legend that ties into this is that the giant came from Denmark with the Vikings, and that the giant actually led an invasion of England from the coast. Some people say that the chalk figure sometimes rises from the dead on dark nights and quenches his thirst in the stream below. Obviously, there's no evidence to back this up, and this overlines with folklore, which we'll be getting to later. Some people suggest that the giant couldn't possibly date from medieval times or Anglo-Saxon times because a wealthy monastery once lay at the foot of the hill. They conclude that the monks of the abbey, which included Aethwic the grammarian, who was also a prominent Anglo-Saxon scholar, wouldn't have tolerated the giant, which they would see as a representation of a carnal and heathen figure. Another note is that Aethwic also wrote the Colloquy, which is a Latin text that describes imagery about the village life. It depicted what you'd expect of village life: ploughing, hunting and herding. There's no mention of the giant. However, Reverend Jonathan Still, the local vicar in 2021, disagrees with this, stating that people don't comprehend the aspirations of the cloistered life. Quoting Reverend Jonathan Still, "The most difficult part of being a monk is coming to terms with yourself and your own existence." Benedict said, "Remain in your cell, and your cell will teach you everything. You have to stay in your place, in your spot, and come to terms with who you are." So the link with the giant would be frank and honest with what we are. That is exactly what the giant is, and that is what the monks would have been trying to do. The numbers 748 have been found near the giant's feet. Many expected this to be a date, and therefore the giant could have been created to represent Cynric, the son of Cuthred, King of Wessex. However, this has been discounted, as Abrahamic numerals didn't take off widely in England until the 15th century, so it's much more likely that the numbers were placed there during a repair in 1748, but the one had eroded. In 2020 and 2021, some amazing new discoveries were made about the giant, conducted by the archaeologists Martin Papworth and Mike Allen. They found 2 species of snails under the giant which came from France and were brought over during the medieval period. This proves that the giant is unlikely to be from the prehistoric or Roman Britain period, but from the medieval period at the earliest. They also took dirt samples from underneath the giant. They believe that the deepest samples of construction were from the date range 700 AD to 1100 AD, thus proving that the giant was constructed somewhere between these dates. Their theory is that the giant could have been built during the late Anglo-Saxon period, but then forgotten about, before he was refound and recut. These scientific results rule out theories that the giant could have been made during the prehistoric or Roman periods. This discovery was also extremely surprising to many archaeologists and historians, who had long speculated that the giant was either prehistoric or post-medieval, not medieval. We'll now be exploring the post-Anglo-Saxon theories of the giant. There is a tale of the giant being created as a mockery to Thomas Corton during the time of the dissolution of the monasteries. This is because the local people accused the abbot of fathering a child with a mistress, along with a whole swathe of other things. You can pause the video here to see what he was accused of. Many 18th century scholars simply dismiss the giant as, and I quote, "the amusement of idle people, and cut with little meaning, perhaps as shepherds' boys strip off the turf on the Wiltshire plains." Although this is a pessimistic viewpoint, it may in fact be the answer. Just a bit of fun by Shepherd's Boys. The most popular theory before the 2020 discoveries was that the giant was cut in the 1700s during the Civil War. The theory goes that the giant was created by Denzil Holles as a parody of Oliver Cromwell. Lord Holles at the time was the owner of the Cerne Abbas estate. This is because of a known rivalry between Denzil Holles and Oliver Cromwell. Denzil Holles, or Denzil Holses, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right, was one of the 11 members after the First English Civil War that led forces against Cromwell. Depicting Cromwell in this light may seem childish and a waste of time to us. However, Cromwell was a known Puritan and would therefore find this action very insulting. This theory is also backed up in a letter by John Hutchins in 1751, when he was writing about the giant, and I quote, "was a modern thing cut in Holles' time." Hutchins did later suggest, however, that Holles may have just recut the giant or edited the figure. Cromwell was sometimes mockingly referred to as England's Hercules by his enemies, so perhaps this reminded Holles of the giant who had it recut. Or this could be where the Hercules misconception comes from, and it was actually created by Holles himself. There's another theory that suggests the giant could have been carved by Denzil Holles' tenants to mock Holles himself. Although this was on his land, so it's unlikely the giant would have survived if this was the case. The historian Brian Edwards dismisses that the giant could have been a representation of a Herculean Cromwell, as it's lacking Cromwell's hair, which was an important part of this characterization. This is proven by this statue, which also depicts a Herculean Cromwell with wild hair. However, Brian Edwards still argues that the giant is indeed a Herculean figure. He pointed out that the date of the giant's first recorded renovation was in 1694, and this coincided with the annual celebration of King William III's birthday, and the anniversary of his invasion of England in 1688. William III was also suggested to be a young Herculean-like figure as propaganda. Our last theory refers to Thomas Frake, who was the MP for Dorset, and who gained the ownership of the Cerne Abbas estate in 1666. He had the nickname the Great Frake in Dorsetshire, which could have been in reference to the giant, and suggests that the giant could have been created during his ownership of the land. This theory gets really interesting when researching his grandson, Anthony Ashley Cooper. This is because his grandson had a keen interest in the choice of Hercules' tale. This is the tale where Hercules needed to decide between virtue and vice. I'm sure you've all heard of it. He wrote many works related to this tale, and even commissioned Paolo de Mattias to paint this picture. Anthony Ashley Cooper could have therefore also have commissioned the giant. He could have commissioned the Herculean figure to honour his grandfather, the Thomas Frake, to honour himself upon returning to England after travelling the world, or just as a moral message to choose virtue over vice to the people of England. So which of these many theories are most likely to be true? Well, the National Trust and the most accepted theory based on evidence suggests that the giant could have been created during Anglo-Saxon times, and that the giant was forgotten about on and off, most probably because he was overgrown, before Holles renovated the giant and could have possibly added a penis to mock Cromwell, and thus combining the most credible theories. There are many folk tales surrounding the giant. We've already been over one about the giant sleeping on the hill. But also, since Victorian times, the giant has also been said to help childlessness and bless women with improved fertility. Women in the surrounding towns and villages had an average of 3 children each in 2010. According to some outlets, this was the highest rate in the whole country, although I couldn't find any proof of this. According to the government, the whole of Dorset had 1.99 births per woman in 2010. However, this is for the whole of Dorset, whereas the giant only lays in North Dorset. So maybe the 3 children per woman was only in North Dorset. The giant could inspire fertility in these women just because of the heritage of the area. According to this folklore, a woman who sleeps on the figure is blessed with fecundity, which is the ability to produce offspring. It's also said that if a couple makes love on the giant, it cures infertility, especially if done on the phallus. John Udall had a huge interest in Dorsetshire folklore. He stated that a man and a woman who wanted to resolve this issue must actually have sexual connection on the spot to have the full effect of a charm. Modern witches still push these traditions and take couples up onto the hill to help them conceive. Kevin Carlyon, a famous British white witch, claims a 90% success rate. This is again unproven. Kevin Carlion and many other witches believe that there are certain spots in the earth that hold special energy inside, and that this energy can be used to influence our lives using spells and charms. One of the most popular spots for witches to promote fertility power is the Giant, with so many people having sex on the spot that certain parts of it are actually eroding. Some nights the Giant can get quite busy, with many couples visiting at night. Cerne Abbas is also a hot spot for couples who are having trouble conceiving children. English Heritage and the Cerne Valley Parish Council don't approve of these actions. They've written letters to the witches to ask them to cut down on this behaviour, although others argue that it should be allowed due to either heritage of the site or even that the magic works. This may sound silly to us, but there are many couples online who attest to the Giant's powers working, so it may indeed have some effect, even if it's only psychological. Since the 1960s, May Day has been marked in Cerne Abbas by a team of Morris dancers called the Wessex Morris Men. The events draw hundreds of villagers, and it sometimes makes its way onto the Giant. After the Morris dancing, locals head to the local pubs for a pint and an English breakfast. This expanded in 2017 to an annual Cerne Abbas Giant Festival. The Cerne Abbas Brewery also has a strong connection with the Giant. They put him on their logos, for instance. There is now a slight rift between the locals and the National Trust. Vic Arvine, a co-owner of the Cerne Abbas Brewery, stated that the National Trust don't own him. He's been around longer than they've existed. Every time the brewery develops a new beer, the brewers climb the hill at night with friends and pour some of the new beer into the Giant's mouth. Quoting Vic Arvine, "I'm very much mindful and respectful of him. He's our Giant. You look after him and he'll look after you. Don't upset him, because he'll come off the hill and eat all the children." Jonathan Still, the vicar in 2021, said, "The Giant is absolutely essential to what this place is and who these people are. He is an active personality in this community, and that is far, far, far more important than when anyone constructed him. He is an artifact. He is undeniable. He just is." Although the locals of Cerne Abbas love the Giant, he does have his critics. For instance, in the 18th century surveys and the earliest surveys of the Giant, the penis has been omitted from some sketches and depictions. This could have just been overlooked, or it could have had something to do with the current views on modesty. In the summer of 1921, a possibly South American artist and antiquarian named Walter Lung came across the Giant for the first time. I say South American because he refers to South America a couple of times. He may have been a visitor, an immigrant, or just a Brit who liked South America. I can't find his census, as Walter Lung is too common of a name. Nevertheless, he didn't take kindly to the Giant. He immediately protested this immodesty to the Chief of Dorset, stating it was not fit for public exhibition. He also complained about postcards that contained the Giant's nudity. After the Chief ignored Walter Lung, he campaigned to remove the penis, or cover it up with a large leaf. Mr. Lung was concerned about future generations being exposed to obscenery. He explained that this was 1921, not pagan times, and that some outdated traditions should be set aside. His protests did gain modest support, including that of 2 bishops. The protest reached the Home Office. However, because the site was a scheduled monument, there was nothing they could do without law changes. In 1930, the Bishop of Salisbury, St. Clair Donaldson, made a complaint to the Home Office about the Giant, and the Home Office was forced to consider this complaint. One suggestion was to plant fig trees in strategic positions. However, the National Trust rejected these, as their job was to conserve the Giant, not to deface it. The Home Office also rejected this, stating that the indecency laws do not apply to Giants. In 2015, the Giant was used as a character in an online comic. This comic was called England Man and was published by Echo Comics. The Giant appeared in various adventures, accompanying another character based on St. George. However, his erect penis was removed from this artwork. This is because many outlets, particularly those in the US, refuse any form of nudity in comic books. The Giant's image is used on various souvenirs and local food produce labels, including those for a range of beers made in the Cerne Abbas Brewery. However, in 2016, the company's beer logo had been censored in the Houses of Parliament. This censorship happened in the Strangers Bar, one of the several bars in the Palace of Westminster. MP Andrew Griffiths slammed the pub, as well as the head brewer of the Cerne Abbas Brewery, Vic Arvine. He also stated on social media that its political correctness gone crazy. The same pub banned Beer Top Totty, another local beer brand, in 2012, as they viewed it to be offensive. In 2021, a tea towel company censored the giant. MP Chris Lodger stated that this was yet another example of woke nonsense gone mad. If this firm wants to use him to make money, they should use the giant for what he is. Until that happens, I discourage anyone from buying this rubbish and suggest that you come down to West Dorset to see him for yourself. Many of the local residents also stated their annoyance on social media and by writing into newspapers. The company shrugged off these complaints at first by stating it was a joke. However, this was easily seen through, as none of their other towels include jokes. The towel company then went on to admit that, and I quote, "Well, to be fair on our critics, we were indeed taking a stance. For Dad and me, when we started our company, we wanted our tea towels to showcase a positive version of Britain." And then the company went on to rant a little bit about Brexit for some reason. The founders of this company are also known to be on the extreme far left. For instance, his mum and his dad own another tea towel company that sells communist and anarchist merchandise. They obviously don't see the irony in starting a company. The giant's fame has also brought with it media attention. A lot of these media stunts do gain permission. However, those that fail to gain permission are inherently defacing the site. Therefore, I will not be mentioning the companies in question here, as to not give them more publicity for defacing the monument. However, if they did ask permission and no harm was done to the giant, then I will mention the name. The first of these happened in 1980 by Kenneth Evans Lord, who is an artist from Devon. He wanted to create a female giant on the opposite hill. This female giant would be a 230-foot figure of Marilyn Monroe. She would be in her iconic pose from the film The 7-Year Itch, the one where her dress is blown up by a subway. The landowner of the hill in question actually gave approval to this figure. However, it failed to go ahead due to lack of funding from the Arts Council. In 1983, some newspaper outlet states that Heineken brewers sponsored the giant. However, there is no further information offered about this. If I ever find out more, I'll post any new information in the description. On April Fool's Day in 1988 and 2002, someone fitted a giant plastic condom onto the giant. There are no images of this, or else I couldn't find one, but it is referenced in a lot of newspapers. In 1994, girls from Rodine School painted a 79-foot replica of the giant on their playing field. This was done the day before Sports Day. This isn't really a media stunt, but I thought I'd mention it anyway. In 1997, the giant's estranged wife came to visit. Her name is the Cerne Abbas giantess, and she was made by Bournemouth University. They were given a task to create a similar figure using non-invasive techniques. She was made with polythene sheeting and plastic tape, and she was holding either a shopping bag or a cloak to pay tribute to her husband's missing cloak. In 1998, pranksters made a 69-foot pair of jeans made out of plastic mesh. Some speculate it was done to publicise an American jeans manufacturer. They were fined £5,000. According to Wikipedia, in 2003, pranksters created their own 70-foot version of the giant on a hill in English Brickner. Apparently, he was wearing wellies, had an ear of corn hanging from his mouth, and a tankard of ale in his hand. However, the citation given no longer works, so I can't verify this. In 2005, a copy of the giant was printed near Gatwick Airport in Surrey. This was done to advertise a deodorant company and showed the giant with two naked women. Around the time, the actual giant was seen with a bicycle. This was most likely done to promote bike use to the public. In 2007, an equal rights gender group, or a person called the Purple Phantom, printed the giant's penis purple as well as many of the doors to some local government offices. This was done as the group believed that males are unfairly discriminated against in UK legal system surrounding child custody. As a publicity stunt for the opening of the Simpsons movie in 2007, a giant Homer Simpson was drawn to the left of the Cerne Abbas giant. This stunt in particular displeased local neo-pagans, who pledged to perform rain magic to wash the figure away, although it did get permission to get made. It was painted with biodegradable paint and washed off after a few weeks. In 2009, the giant wore a red nose for comic relief. Comic Relief itself is a charity run by the BBC, paid for by the taxpayer. The BBC did this to promote the charity, and the charity in particular spends a huge amount of money in the UK on advertising. Comic Relief is a politicised charity, and its activities change every year according to what the BBC want it to do. In 2012, the UK was submerged in enthusiasm for the Olympic Games, which were at that time being held in the UK. Pupils from Cerne Abbas First School, Sidlingfree School, Lucent School, District Lions Club, and other members of the local community therefore climbed the hill and recreated the iconic Olympic torch. They didn't do this by vandalising the site. Instead, they dressed in yellow, orange and red to mimic the fire. In 2013, the National Trust supported Movember, which raises awareness for prostate cancer, testicular cancer and male suicide. A huge grass moustache was authorised for the temporary placement on the giant. The moustache measured 39 by 10 feet according to the designer British Seed Houses. However, the National Trust and BBC reported it being 36 by 89 feet. In 2017, the letters spelling out Theresa were placed on the giant in reference to the current Prime Minister, Theresa May. It's unknown exactly why the letters were placed, although it was most likely someone who was annoyed with the Prime Minister for any number of reasons. Some speculate that it could have been a joke, as the Conservative slogan at the time was "Standing Up for Britain." The boarded letters were pinned down onto the giant, causing damage which the National Trust needed to pay to repair. Also in 2017, a bookmaker company turned the giant into a tennis player as a tribute to Andy Murray as Wimbledon was kicking off. However, they also included their trademark on the giant, so it was obviously just a publicity stunt. In 2019, for International Women's Day, the giant's penis was turned into a flower and his testicles into leaves. This was done without asking permission by the National Trust. The feminists did this to promote, and I quote, "an invitation for unity rather than a binary gendered him." However, the local Cerne Abbas brewers took exception to this, and I quote, "It's an erect penis, and an erect penis is an erect penis." The night before May Day, the locals climbed the hill with LED lights to illuminate the giant's penis and face. They saw this as a way to restore the giant's compromised dignity. In 2020, the giant was given an unauthorised face mask due to the outbreak of the coronavirus. The words "Wear mask, save life" was also placed on the hillside. This was one of the many PR stunts used to promote a movie that was coming out. Later that year, the giant was given a second unauthorised mask. 3 days prior, this sketch appeared on Twitter. However, the tweeter stated it was just a bizarre coincidence. In fairness, the tweeter was an archaeologist, so he may have had a sketch lying around anyway, and someone may have come up with the idea separately, or was just inspired by the tweet. However, it may have also been done by the tweeter to gain followers. These stunts, especially those that fail to gain permission, anger local neo-pagans, as they see it as disrespectful to their religious site, heritage and culture. However, the neo-pagans are ignored and mocked by the media, particularly The Guardian and people on the internet, mostly on Reddit, for exposing their religious and spiritual beliefs. Determining the ownership of the giant is hard, as we don't know for sure when it was built. But instead we can track the ownership of the Cerne Abbas estate, which includes the village of Cerne Abbas, the Cerne Abbey, the giant and the surrounding fields. The word Cerne is believed to have come from the Celtic god, Cernunnos, and would have lain Durotrige's territory. There was definitely Briton activity on the site between the years 750 BC and 43 AD. The Romans seem to have very little activity here, although a Romano-British oven was found dating to the 2nd century near a body, but the body was buried in a pre-Christianity fashion. Cerne Abbey was built on the site in 987 AD by the writer, poet and teacher Ethelmere the Scout, who sent Ælfric the grammarian to be its first Benedict abbot, although it is possible that another religious order occupied the land at least a century earlier. Around this abbey, the village of Cerne Abbas was born. Abbas meaning abbot in Latin. The abbey was the heartbeat and principal owner of the village for around 500 years, until it was surrendered to Henry VIII in 1539 and desecrated. Sadly, a lot of the history was lost during this time. I'll do a video about the dissolution of the monasteries at a later date. Cerne Abbas was then leased off, and the land was exchanged between many different landlords. The first of these was a Dutch Lutenist called Philip van Walder. John Norden in 1617 stated that the abbey was wholly ruined and that Cerne Abbas village was most disorderly governed. There were multiple leases and tenants in the area, which caused much confusion, and this is still confusing today when trying to research it. This confusion ended in 1629 when Thomas Frake, a politician from an old Dorset family, acquired the estate. However, in 1701, the Frakes failed to pass the land to any further descendants, and it therefore passed through George Pitt Stratfordshire, a Tory politician, through marriage. This is because at the time, women couldn't inherit land. During the English Civil War, the land was taken and occupied by both Royalist and Protestant sides. It was during this time that Denzil Holles became in charge of the giant, temporarily. This ended in 1705 when the ownership of the property was returned to the Pitt family of Stratfordshire. Under this family the village flourished, and a small market town gradually grew wealthy through its brewing industry. Bishop Pocock stated that the village is, and I quote, more famous for beer than any other place in the kingdom. Through Acts of Parliaments, in 1975 the Pitt family had cemented their ownership of the lands. George Pitt, in 1776, reformed the estate and created the Barren Rivers of Stratfordshire. This baronetcy became extinct in 1880, and the land was divided up between the Pitt descendants. This led to Lieutenant General August Henry Lane Fox inheriting the site through marriage. Henry Lane Fox was also a pioneering archaeologist and anthropologist. Augustus Henry Lane Fox therefore added Pitt Rivers to his name to honour his great uncle, who had bequeathed it to him. It was during this time that Horace Pitt Rivers, the 6th Baron, ordered the giant to be repaired. This is the first historical account of the giant. In the 19th century, the railways bypassed Cerne Abbas, and its once prospering brewery industry went into decline. This added to World War I and the death duties placed on the Pitt Rivers family after the death of Augustus Pitt Rivers persuaded the sale of the village in 1919. 4,700 acres split into 75 lots, and the giant was up for sale. The land was sold off at auctions for £67,402, or £3,708,262 when adjusted for 2022 inflation. It was sold between many different buyers, many being the tenants themselves. The massive sell-off of Dorset estates has been coined by some to be the sale of the century. However, the Cerne Abbas giant was not for sale. The giant and the 0.99 acre site were gifted to the National Trust by its owners, Alexander and George Pitt Rivers, in 1920. The National Trust remain the owners of the giant to this day. The National Trust re-chalk the figure using 17 tons of new white chalk, replacing the older grey chalk every 25 years. This is mostly done by volunteers. Local sheep also played their part in keeping down the grass on the site. However, in 2008, due to the lack of sheep, volunteers also help out. Public access to the giant has been free to the public to explore. There is a small fence around the site, however it's not guarded and is often hopped over. The giant became a scheduled monument on the 15th of October 1924, with help from the National Trust. This means that there are lawful protections of the monument. Bushwood was used to camouflage him during World War II. The Home Guard did this following the increasing number of petty bombings from German aircrafts. Since the end of the war, the giant has always been on full display. There have been suggestions to build a larger fence around the giant to stop the high amount of media stunts. However, this hasn't gained much momentum. In 2006, the National Trust also found some uncommon flowers on the site. However, this also hasn't convinced them to shut off the site. The giant isn't seen as a major tourist attraction in the UK, but seen more as an English oddity. It draws in most people who already have a key interest in UK history, or worldwide visitors who have an interest in European folklore. That being said, the giant is still well loved and known across the British Isles and the world. It is viewed as an example of unique British culture to foreigners. For example, the giant is referenced in the Japanese video game Pokemon Sword and Moon, which is loosely set in Great Britain. The locals of Cerne Abbas love their giant. They place him on logos, merch, and drawing across the village and the local area. The giant also attracts a lot of couples from across the UK who hope to have children. Some nights, the giant can get quite busy. According to Kevin Clayton, the giant is the leading fertility site in the world. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Some other videos to check out are in the description, alongside the references used in this video.